There's a hantavirus outbreak that originated on a cruise ship and it's still making headlines. Plus, we've now got Ebola back in the news cycle. And if your Facebook feed looks anything like mine, you've run across at least one person somewhere online that says something like, and this is precisely why I never want to take a cruise. It's the question of the day. So, is cruising really like being on a floating Petri dish? Is it actually more dangerous than other types of travel? And if you're a cruiser and you are going to still cruise, what do you actually need to do to not get sick? Hi, I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. Now, the hantavirus story, you've probably heard about this. It originated on an expedition ship that sailed through remote South Atlantic waters. And the working theory from investigators is that the first person who was infected picked up the virus on land in Argentina. So they were doing an excursion. If you've taken cruises, you probably have, if you're watching this channel, you know that we take excursions, right? So these cruisers, they were out, they were doing an excursion. Someone picked up the virus. They suspect it may have been at a landfill, then brought it back on the ship. And it was in that ship setting that it started to spread from person to person. So the ship was the setting, it was not the source. And that distinction, it does get lost in the coverage, but it matters. Now, the Ebola situation is a much more serious outbreak. It's in the DRC and in Uganda. It's a humanitarian crisis in that region. But for someone planning a Caribbean cruise or Mediterranean sailing, the CDC's risk assessment is really low. Now, here's my point here. Neither of these stories is really about cruising being uniquely dangerous. They're about what happens when a virus meets a group of people in a small enclosed space. And that story, it happens everywhere, not just on ships. Now, let me make the case for airplanes for just a second, because airplanes get away with a lot. You're sitting in a metal tube with recycled air for anywhere from 2 to 12 hours. The person next to you is 3 inches away. You're probably touching skin to skin, whether you want to or not. And that tray table in front of you, according to more than one study, is among the most bacteria-laden surfaces in commercial travel, largely because it gets wiped down very infrequently and very insufficiently. HEPA filtration on modern aircraft is real, and it genuinely helps with airborne particles, but it doesn't protect you from the person on your left that's sneezing directly in your face during a 4-hour cross-country flight. Norovirus, flu, colds, and COVID, they all spread on aircraft just like they do on ships. But when that happens, we don't call it a plane outbreak. We call it getting sick after a trip. Now, all-inclusives, they also can be a haven for viruses. All-inclusive resorts, they have shared pools, shared buffets, and guests arriving from dozens of different countries in the same place, and they're sharing the same space with the same people generally over a period of days. Theme parks also, they're crowded. They have high-touch environments with long lines, shared handrails, lots of kids who tend to be a little more gross, packed restaurants and tourist areas, train cars, casino floors. None of those have cleaner track records than a cruise ship. So anytime you put a large number of people from different places into a shared space, you're going to have some level of disease transmission potential. So I don't think this is a cruise ship problem. That is just the basic reality of collective human existence. Now, here's where I do want to concede a little bit of a point, because I do think cruising has some specific characteristics that are worth being honest about. So while I'll argue till the cows come home that cruising is not inherently much more dangerous than flying on a plane or being an all-inclusive or being at a casino for 2 hours, touching all the buttons where people aren't washing their hands, right? I do want to be honest about something with cruising. A cruise ship, it is a closed loop, basically. So if norovirus or some other nasty gets on board, it kind of has nowhere to go. The crew is fighting a contained outbreak while also serving dinner, running activities, and managing port calls. And I actually was on a cruise that had a norovirus outbreak, actually declared by the CDC, on my Panama Canal cruise earlier this year. So that dynamic of that kind of closed environment, that is legit. And cruise culture is all about the buffets. Now, I personally avoid buffets. If you follow me, you know that I'm very vocal about that, because buffets can be a haven for transmission of nasty things. It involves shared serving utensils and food that can be sitting out at inconsistent temperatures, and that is a legitimate transmission vector if it's not managed carefully. And not to scare you, but I did just recently make a YouTube video about discussing things that people do on cruises, and a lot of the stories that I got were in the buffet. So if you want to check that out and you don't have a weak stomach, I'll drop that link below so you can go watch that video. So the sheer number of shared surfaces on a ship, that adds up over a 7-night sailing, for example, in ways that a day trip somewhere else wouldn't. You've got those elevator buttons, the buffets, the shared MDR spaces, pool deck chairs, railings, casino chips, show theater armrest, the card reader at the spa desk when you're checking in and out. And the most well-documented illness associated with cruise ships does tend to be norovirus. As I mentioned, I was recently on a cruise that had a norovirus outbreak. I was not affected, thankfully. So it is worth understanding why. Now, cruise lines, they are legally required to report gastrointestinal illness rates above a specific threshold to the CDC's vessel sanitation program. So that's what happens happened in my case. I was on Holland America Line's Rotterdam ship. It met that threshold, so I didn't find out till I got back home. I knew something was amiss on the cruise, but when I got back home, I saw it in the news. And by the way, the cruise line never informed any of us officially. I saw it in the news that it met that threshold, and therefore the CDC had determined that this particular cruise that I was on was an outbreak. So when norovirus circulates on a ship, it gets documented, it gets reported, and usually it is covered by the press. When it circulates on an airplane though, it typically doesn't make the news unless someone is able to connect those dots afterward. So while cruise ships can be a floating petri dish, we're measuring one of these environments and not the other. One makes the news, the other one doesn't. As a result, cruising ends up getting painted with this bad brush of saying, well, cruising is inherently dirtier or more dangerous or more risky or more likely to make you sick. Now, what most shipboard norovirus outbreaks have in common is that they usually trace back to a passenger who already boarded when they were sick or they were already in the incubation period, not to something that originated on the ship itself, like from the galley or the water supply. The ship itself, of course, does not generate the illness, the ship contains it. And that is the little bit of a problem with cruising. But again, you have that in other things like all-inclusives, airplanes, etc. They just don't make the news. But whether or not you think cruising gets unfairly painted with this petri dish brush, I want to talk about practical steps because this is what actually matters. How can you avoid getting sick on a cruise? Well, long story short, sometimes no matter what you do, you can't avoid getting sick. You're still going to get sick, but there are ways that you can mitigate it. And the single highest impact thing you can do on a cruise ship, and I know this sounds really basic, but I have taken enough cruises, about 50 at this point, and I am very OCD. If you follow me, you know that. I talk about cleanliness in cruise ships and gross cruise ship behavior a lot because I am a human observer. I watch people. I always wash my hands. We always sanitize our hands. We're pretty diligent with sanitation and hygiene and things like that. So on a cruise, I'm always kind of naturally mindful and watching of other people and if they wash their hands. And I hate to tell you, a lot of people do not, especially on cruise ships. And I think that's anywhere, but I've observed it more on cruise ships probably than anywhere else. But people, you gotta wash your hands. And I'm not talking just a quick rinse under the water. I'm talking hot water, soap, and making sure it is thorough. Actual hand washing with soap takes about 20 seconds at a minimum. And norovirus in particular is famously resistant to alcohol-based sanitizers. So you can't even be like, oh, hey, there's sanitation stations, which unfortunately a lot of cruise lines have now started to remove as we're getting further away from 2020. But even that sanitizer isn't gonna protect you because norovirus is resistant to that. I actually learned that fun little fact during my own norovirus cruise. So just using those dispensers is not sufficient. You can use them in the gaps, but you actually have to wash your hands anytime you're going to have a meal or times you're gonna be touching your face or your mouth. This one habit is responsible for the vast majority of disease prevention on cruise ships. And it sounds so basic that again, people I think just tend to gloss over it. Don't gloss over it. Wash your hands. Now at the buffet, of course, there's basic hygiene protocols we can follow. I'm very direct and honest and just telling you I avoid the buffet. I just took a wonderful cruise on Royal Caribbean Star of the Seas. And even though it was a longer cruise, it was an 8-day cruise, I didn't go to the buffet one time because again, I've seen so much bad behavior. I've seen people not wash their hands. I cruise a lot. I try not to get sick on a cruise, but here's some best practices that everybody should be following. Make sure you're using the serving utensils that are provided. Never use your hands. Don't use your own fork. Use the utensils that are provided every single time. And try to keep your hands away from your face while you're in the food line. And for God's sake, if you have to sneeze, step away from the line, sneeze in your hand, don't sneeze toward the food. Because those sneeze guards, or shall I say sneeze guards, don't actually do much. If a tong is missing or it looks like it's been sitting in the wrong place or it looks dirty, or for heaven's sake, if you see someone drop it on the floor, I've seen that, and try to pick it back up and put it right back. Intervene, ask a crew member for a fresh one. Don't think that you're being difficult. They're going to appreciate that you're looking out for this kind of thing. And that's another thing too. In my cruise video that I made about gross things that people do on cruises, a lot of these things were about intervention. And I know it's awkward when you see someone doing something disgusting to call it out. And we also don't want to create a cruise ship brawl because those are also kind of a thing. I've got a lot of videos about that as well. But if you see something, say something. And you don't have to be rude or confrontational to the disgusting person. You can quietly say to a crew member, hey, I saw that, someone handled this and it was gross or whatever, they dropped it. Could you just get a fresh one? Or say, hey, could we just get a fresh serving utensil or something like that? Now, if you do have a balcony cabin, you start to feel run down mid-sailing. I did catch the flu on my Carnival Mardi Gras birthday cruise 2 years ago. It was an awful experience, and I felt that I was getting sick before I actually got sick. So if you start to feel run down in the middle of a sailing, please use your balcony room. Fresh air and physical separation from those crowded spaces, it's genuinely useful, and be mindful of your other cruisers. Once I felt off and I felt like I was starting to come down with something, of course I wanted to be out enjoying my cruise. I wanted to be playing playing in the casino and seeing the shows, but I self-contained myself in my room and I sought out a mask from the medical center because I didn't want to spread that to my fellow cruisers. And I already am a big hand washer. I wash my hands a whole lot more. So it sounds low tech, but your respiratory tract, it will thank you. Now, of course, if you do develop any gastrointestinal symptoms on board, tell guest services. I understand the impulse is just to power through because nobody wants to be stuck forcibly in their cabin, especially on something like a sea day. But the crew would rather help you manage it than have 4 more tables at dinner find out the hard way. And you do not want to be patient zero that's making hundreds of people sick. And if you're talking about immunocompromised people or elderly people or things like that, they could actually die from this. So try to be respectful and mindful. It is not worth making other people sick just because you don't want to sacrifice your good time on a cruise. Now, most cruise lines, they do have a clear protocol for this. And this is important because, again, norovirus is the #1 thing that cruises have a difficult thing for. Hantavirus, Ebola, those are the big scary headline things. But the reality is it is the norovirus that is a cruise ship problem and does seem to be more contained to a cruise ship than, say, airplanes or all-inclusives or other places as well. So if you feel those gastrointestinal symptoms, that's the most important one to really be extra careful and really wash your hands and sanitize. And report it early, let them help you. And as someone who has been cruise ship quarantined, when I did catch the flu, I self-quarantined, I got officially diagnosed by the med center. They asked that I please stay in my room. And by the way, this might surprise you, they don't forcibly contain you in your room. There was no yellow tape, there was no room lock. It's basically an honor system. I could have easily, being fully sick with the flu, I could have gone out on the cruise ship and made a lot of other people sick and nobody would have been any of the wiser. But they do take care of you. The cruise lines will make sure that you have free room service provided. They did check in on us a couple of times, which was really nice. So just make sure you report it. Don't just go out and make other people sick. Now for adventure travel specifically, which is where this whole hantavirus thing kicked off, the calculus is going to be a little bit different. If you're off the ship, you're doing a hiking trip, a wildlife excursion, or any type of outdoor activity in rural areas before you get back on a ship, pay attention to what's endemic in that region. Rodent habitats, this is the whole hantavirus thing, freshwater exposure, insect exposure, all of these things carry risks that vary by destination. You can check the CDC health travel page for any country that you're visiting. It's organized nicely by destination. It only takes about 2 minutes to look up and it'll tell you that there's something active in that area that you should be aware of. And of course, your doctor can advise you on any destination-specific vaccines or precautions that are relevant to your health history and your itinerary. Now, if you're kicking it in the Caribbean, probably not so much to worry about, but if you're doing something in some more exotic location, you do need to check on these things. And I'm always gonna beat this like a drum, but travel insurance, it is pretty much a necessity if you ask me. And it's important to have travel insurance that also includes medical evacuation coverage, especially if you're gonna be sailing or doing adventure activities in remote or expedition waters. Because in this case, the current hantavirus story, it involves a ship that was days away. It was pretty far out to sea. So it was far from the next major port area when things really kind of hit the fan and got serious on the cruise ship. So people that got really sick on board, they were pretty far from land. So having a plan for that scenario, God forbid, where you need a medical evacuation or what we call a medevac, it can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. But if it's the difference between life and death, who cares, right? But have travel insurance because that is going to make sure that that is covered. And if you want a quote for travel insurance, I can provide you one instantly. I'll drop the link down below. And I also have a comprehensive guide to travel insurance for cruisers that tells you all the ins and outs, what's covered and what is not. But one thing I want to point out, because a lot of cruisers mistakenly think this, they think, oh, I have the gold standard health insurance at home in the good old US of A. It's going to protect me. No, friends, it will not. So check out my guide, make sure you stay aware. Now, there are some practical things you can do. There's all these cruise hacks, and I wanna know, drop your comments down below for what you do to stay safe and healthy on a cruise, and I'll share with you some of mine. We always bring Lysol wipes, and we wipe down all of the air vents, we wipe down the remote control, we actually will wash the remote control under hot water and soap and Lysol it. We always check our bed for bed bugs. That's not something that's gonna give you a virus, of course, but bed bugs on cruise ships can happen too. So always make sure you shine a light. If you have a hairdryer, you can blow heat around the seams. That'll make the bed bug scatter. Unfortunately, I do have a bed bug cruise ship story. That's another episode. It wasn't an infestation, but it was residue from bed bugs, which is gross enough. But anyway, enough said about that. Because you got to remember, as hard as these cruise ship crew work and room stewards work really hard to clean our rooms, once we get off a cruise ship, they're responsible for turning over dozens of rooms, oftentimes with just 1 to 3 people in their crew in just a short period of time before the next group of cruisers embark. So it might look clean, it's probably not clean. So bring those Lysol wipes. I know when you get on a cruise, it's exciting. You want to unpack, you want to go out, you want to have fun, you want to hit the pool, but spending a little bit of time doing your due diligence to kind of tidying up your own room is going to go a long way in helping you not get sick. And if nothing else, people, wash your hands. So cruise ships, I still stand on the fact that it's not a floating Petri dish in the way that sets it apart from other forms of mass travel, but it is a little bit of a unique environment. It's enclosed, it's shared by a large number of people. It requires some basic hygiene practices that if we don't have a collective consensus of everybody participating in these things, one person can make a whole lot of people sick. So the news cycle is going to keep producing scary disease headlines. That's kind of what they do. They're always going to call out cruise ships as the floating Petri dishes. They're so dangerous. They're so unhealthy. I think that's a bunch of BS. I don't think cruising is categorically riskier than the plane that you took to get to the port, but just be smart, be mindful, and if nothing else, you already know this, wash your hands.